Before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable. Let your arms go heavy, your breath slow. And as you listen, feel free to leave a comment sharing what time it is, where you are, and what city or village you're listening from. It's love to know. And if you'd like more quiet stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe so they gently appear when you need them most. Now, let's begin. The day fades from the castle slowly, and with it, the noise of clattering hooves in the courtyard, the ring of iron striking iron from the smithy, and the distant shouts of servants hurrying to finish their tasks before darkness swallows the stone. The air grows colder with every minute of twilight. You hear the caw of crows circling above the battlements. You see the mist rising from the moat, and you feel the dampness creeping into the great walls, thicker with each passing breath of night. Inside the keep, the largest and strongest part of the castle, the temperature drops as though the very stones are sighing out the warmth of the day. The walls are thick, built to resist siege, but they are merciless against the cold. Touch them with your hand, and you feel not comfort but chill seeping through skin and bone. Candles flicker in iron sconces, their flames bending against drafts that slip through arrow slits and door frames. The air smells of smoke and damp wool, of tallow and rushes. You can almost hear the stillness of the walls themselves, holding centuries of winter silence. Pause here. Imagine yourself seated on a wooden bench near the great hearth. The fire roars, its flames tall, sparks spitting upward, wood popping and collapsing into embers. For a moment, you feel warmth against your face, but lean back, even slightly, and the chill presses against your shoulders. In a castle, fire fought against the cold, but never fully won. Heat reached only as far as the flames could stretch. Beyond that, stone reasserted its silence for those who lived within these walls. Sleeping was never a simple matter of rest. It was a matter of survival against cold so deep it could bite through wool and linen, could stiffen limbs, could leave frost on breath indoors. Medieval chronicles speak of winters so fierce that rivers froze solid, that livestock perished in fields, that entire villages starved when harvests failed. Inside castles, the cold did not vanish, merely changed form, becoming drafts, whispering through gaps, damp creeping up from floors, frost settling on window frames. Pause again. You hear the wind outside, rushing against towers, rattling shutters. You feel it seep through cracks, brushing your skin, though you are deep within the keep. The fire hisses louder, but the chill lingers. Sleep in such a place was not gentle, not easy. It required layers of defense as carefully arranged as armor before battle. The first defense was architecture. In the Lord's chamber, tapestries hung from walls, thick, woven scenes of hunts or battles, not merely decoration, but insulation. They softened the echo of stone, trapped what little warmth the fire offered, and blocked drafts beneath them. Rush mats covered the floors, changed seasonally, sprinkled with herbs like lavender and thyme to mask damp smells. Wooden shutters closed over narrow windows, though they could not seal completely. Heavy doors were drawn, iron bolts secured, yet always the cold lingered, pressing like an unseen hand against the body. Now imagine the bed itself. It's as large, raised on a wooden frame, curtained with heavy cloth to keep in warmth. The mattress is stuffed with straw or feathers, depending on wealth, and laid thick with woolen blankets, fur pelts, sometimes even cloaks thrown across in desperation. When the curtains are drawn, the bed becomes a small chamber within a chamber, a cocoon of fabric and breath, the only true shelter from the stone's eternal chill. Step inside, pull the curtains tight, and you hear the wind muffled, the fire faint, the silence deepened. The air grows warmer from your own body, though still the cold presses at the edges. Pause once more. You feel the weight of blankets pressing down, the softness of fur against skin, the faint smell of smoke woven into wool. Outside the bed curtain, the room remains vast, cold, silent. Inside, you find a fragile refuge, a small island of warmth within the sea of stone. But not all slept in such comfort. Servants lay on pallets of straw near kitchens, wrapped in rough woolen cloaks. Guards kept watch in towers, stamping their feet against frost, their torches guttering in the wind. Children shared beds for warmth, huddling close, their breath misting in the air. Even the Lord himself, despite his bed curtains and furs, sometimes felt the bite of winter deep in his bones. Chroniclers note kings and nobles waking to find frost on their coverlets, their water frozen in jugs beside them, their breath a cloud above their heads. The struggle was not only with cold, but with damp. In castles built on stone foundations, moisture seeped upward, leaving floors slick, rushes moldy air heavy with chill. Fire smoked when wood was wet, filling chambers with haze that stung eyes but offered little heat. The smell of damp wool and tallow hung thick, mingling with the scent of ash. To sleep in such a place was to sink into heaviness, not only of blankets, but of air itself, pressing close, clinging to lungs. And so, sleep became a negotiation between warmth and cold, between comfort and endurance, between silence and the distant noises of winter night, the cry of wind through battlements, the howl of dogs in the yard, the muffled creak of timbers under frost. Those who closed their eyes in castles did not sleep lightly. They sank into layers of defense, aware, always, that the stone around them was older, colder, stronger than flesh. Pause again. You hear the fire snapping. You feel the weight of blankets. You sense the breath misting above your lips. You listen for silence, but instead you hear the faint sigh of wind through a gap. The quiet drip of melted frost, finding a path through stone. The castle never sleeps fully. Its cold breath lingers, its silence waits, and you are left with a reflection that drifts like smoke against the rafters. In the stone heart of a medieval castle, was sleep truly rest? Or was it only a fragile truce made each night with the cold that never left? Asterisk, the night deepens, and the fire in the great hall glows like a living heart. Its embers crackle softly, their warmth reaching outward, though never far enough. Calm people draw closer, spreading their cloaks, rubbing their hands, letting the heat settle against skin, while the vast room behind them remains cloaked in shadow. In the corner, smoke clings low beneath the rafters, twisting upward in pale ribbons before seeping out through a hole in the roof. The fire gives light, and it gives life, but in a medieval castle, even its strength was fleeting. Pause here. Picture the hearth itself. Great logs stacked carefully, split by servants and dragged inside. Sparks leap and hiss as pitch catches. Smell is heavy, a mixture of oak, pine, and resin, mingling with the lingering scent of damp wool, tallow, candles, and straw rushes underfoot. You hear the shift of benches as people move closer, the quiet shuffle of dogs who curl near the flames, their bodies as much a source of warmth as the fire itself. Fires in castles were enormous, yet even they could not banish the cold. The great hall, with its high ceilings and stone walls, swallowed heat as quickly as it was made. Those closest to the fire basked in warmth, while those a few steps back felt only a faint breath against their faces. Smoke stung eyes, ash-coated skin, and yet without the hearth. Survival in winter would have been impossible in private chambers. Smaller fires burned in corner hearths, but their power was weaker still. Lords and ladies sat wrapped in layers, cloaks drawn close, hands hidden in fur muffs. They leaned toward the flames, though even within arm's reach, the heat was thin, the stone behind them cold enough to sting. Water in jugs froze overnight. Frost crept across shutters, canned breath misted in the air, even where flames had burned for hours. The paradox of medieval life was this: castles built for strength against enemies were weaker against the enemy of cold. Pause again. You imagine yourself standing in such a room. The fire crackles in its grate. The flames glow warmly, but lean back into shadow, and the cold is immediate. It presses against your neck, settles into your bones, reminding you that warmth is always fleeting, and so people adapted. They dressed for bed in woolen shifts, long tunics, sometimes even cloaks. Feet were wrapped in cloth or stuffed into boots to ward off frost. In wealthier chambers, beds themselves became fortresses of warmth, feather mattresses stacked thick, curtains drawn tightly, fur throws piled high. Families and servants alike often shared beds, not only for company, but for survival. A child curled against a parent, siblings huddled together, servants sleeping in corners of their lord's chamber, all seeking heat from one another as much as from fire. But the cold had habits of its own, and people adjusted their lives around it. In many castles, nights were divided into 2 sleeps. People would rest for a few hours after nightfall, then wake in the deep hours to tend fires, pray, or simply sit in silence before returning to bed for a second sleep until dawn. In this rhythm, firewood was added, blankets were shaken, and warmth was renewed. Sleep was not continuous, but punctuated, as much about maintaining life as about dreaming. Pause once more. You hear the stir of someone waking in the dark, their footsteps muffled against rushes. They stir the fire, its embers glowing, its warmth returning faintly to the chamber. The rest of the household shifts in sleep, unaware, their breath misting faintly in the cold air. Then silence returns, broken only by the slow crackle of wood. For servants, the habits were harsher still. Many slept in kitchens where the fire burned long into night, but smoke blackened their lungs and heat was uneven. Guards on night watch wrapped themselves in cloaks, stamping their feet against frost, their torches casting weak light against towers of stone. Sleep was brief, snatched in corners, their bodies stiff with cold. The castle's defenses, so strong against men, were never strong against winter winds, and yet there was resilience in these rhythms. People did not expect comfort, but learned endurance. They knew the places where warmth lingered, near dogs curled in straw, beneath bed curtains heavy with furs, in moments when a fire roared high. They knew, too, that cold was constant, that it could not be defeated, only managed. Each night was an act of patience, of repetition, of quiet persistence against the breath of winter stone, and you are left with a reflection that drifts like embers into the rafters. In a world where warmth was fleeting and cold eternal, was sleep ever truly rest? Or was it simply another battle quietly fought within the silence of the night? Asterisk. Castle at night is never silent, though its silence feels heavy. The wind moves around towers and battlements, pressing against shutters, moaning faintly through arrow slits. Fires hiss and crackle, their glow spilling across stone floors in trembling light. Footsteps echo along cold passages where guards make their rounds, their breath misting in the air. Beneath all of this, there is a deeper stillness, the presence of cold itself, an invisible companion that waits in every chamber, seeps into every bed, lingers against every wall. Pause here. Imagine lying in bed behind thick curtains of wool, your body buried beneath layers of blankets and fur. You hear the wind pressing at the shutters. You feel the stone's breath rising through the floor. You see the faint glow of embers slipping between cracks in the curtain. Warmth clings close, fragile and fleeting, while cold presses steadily, patient, eternal. Even in the Lord's chamber, with its hearth burning and its tapestries hanging heavy, the cold was never far. Water jugs froze overnight, breath hung in pale clouds above pillows. Some chronicles speak of frost forming on coverlets in the morning, sparkling faintly as curtains were drawn aside. The great walls that shielded from arrows and siege stones were merciless against winter nights, so people learned to sleep differently. They did not expect to drift easily into warmth. They layered themselves carefully: linen, undergarments, woolen tunics, thick cloaks, stockings pulled high. At their feet, stones heated in the hearth were sometimes wrapped in cloth and slipped beneath blankets, radiating warmth for a short while before cooling to cold lumps. Some shared beds with servants or companions, the mingling of breath and body heat a necessary defense against frost. The practice was practical, not sentimental. Warmth was survival. Pause again. You picture a bed crowded with figures, their bodies pressed close, their breathing slow and heavy, their warmth mingling in the small, enclosed chamber created by curtains. Outside that space, the air is sharp, each draft creeping in like an intruder. But inside, a fragile pocket of comfort forms, a brief escape from the stone's breath. The cold was not only physical, but psychological. It shaped how nights unfolded, how routines were kept. Fires were banked carefully before sleep, their embers buried in ash to preserve colds until morning. Rushes were shaken to release damp herbs scattered to keep musty smells at bay. Children were tucked between older siblings, dogs encouraged to sleep near doors where drafts crept in. All of this was ritual, a choreography of survival performed nightly through long winters. And still, sleep was often broken. People woke in the deepest hours of night, their skin chilled, their breath clouding in the air. They stirred fires, rearranged blankets, whispered prayers. In these hours, the castle was quietest, its halls echoing only with the sound of wind or the distant watchman's call. Sleep returned slowly, heavy as stone, carrying them into the final stretch of night. For servants and guards, the experience was harsher still. In drafty rooms, in guard towers, in kitchens where fires smoldered, sleep came in fragments. A cloak over straw, a hand near a fading ember, a body curled tightly against itself. These were their defenses. Some huddled near the warmth of animals in stables, the breath of horses or cattle offering what the stone denied. Cold was democratic in castles. It touched lord and servant alike, though some fought it with furs and fires, while others endured with little more than will. Pause once more. You imagine walking the corridors at midnight, the stones beneath your feet icy, the air so cold it stings your throat. You pass a servant curled against the wall, his cloak pulled tight, his body still. You hear the faint rustle of tapestries in a draft, the muffled thud of shutters shifting in the wind. The castle seems alive with cold, as though it breathes and moves in its own rhythm. And yet, life endured. Each morning, embers were uncovered, fires coaxed back to flame, blankets shaken, water broken free from ice. People rose stiff, their fingers numb, their bodies weary, but they rose because they had no choice. The cold was not something to conquer, but something to live with, to fold into the rhythm of existence. Castles were built for strength, not comfort, and their inhabitants carried this truth, into every night of sleep, and you're left with a reflection that drifts like frost across a shutter. In the stone breath of medieval castles was survival. At night, a matter of warmth itself, or of the patience to endure cold as a companion that never truly left. Asterisk. The castle has fallen into evening silence once more. The fires in the great hall are low, their embers glowing faintly against stone. The smell of smoke lingers, heavy and familiar, mixed with the damp scent of rushes and wool. You follow a servant carrying folded bundles of cloth up a narrow spiral. Stare, her steps slow, her arms filled with layers meant not for beauty, but for survival. For in a castle, sleep began not with rest, but with preparation, with dressing the body for a long night against the cold. Pause here. Picture entering a chamber, the shutters closed against the wind, a small fire flickering in the hearth. She lays the bundles down carefully, and with quiet hands she unfolds them. Undergarments of linen, soft but thin, woolen tunics, heavy and rough, cloaks lined with fur, their edges stiff with age. Each layer has its place, each meant to hold back the stone's breath. For those who lived in castles, warmth was never expected from walls alone. It came from fabric, from fur, from the skill of weavers, and the patience of those who dressed themselves each night as though for battle. Linen was closest to the skin, its weave soft, its surface smooth enough not to chafe. Over it came wool, thick and insulating, sometimes so heavy it pressed against the body like armor. For the wealthy fur was added, fox, rabbit, even ermine, soft, supple, holding heat. The poor wrapped themselves in rougher hides. Their smell strong, their surface stiff, but still warmer than wool alone. Pause again. You feel the weight of these layers as they are added one by one. First linen cool against the skin, then wool, scratchy, but warming, then fur, heavy and enclosing. The body grows bulkier, the limbs slower, but warmth begins to gather, fragile yet real. In wealthier chambers, fur-lined nightgowns were prized, their seams stitched carefully, their collars high against the throat. Some even had sleeves that tied shut at the wrists to trap warmth. Children were bundled tightly, wrapped in cloths that left only their faces visible, their small bodies tucked close together for safety. The ritual of dressing for sleep was as important as the ritual of prayer before bed. To forget a layer was to invite a restless night, shivering beneath blankets, waiting for dawn. And blankets themselves were heavy, layered as carefully as garments. First came sheets of linen, then thick woolen covers, then pelts of fur. On the coldest nights, cloaks and spare clothing were thrown across beds, adding weight until the sleeper could scarcely move. The bed curtains were drawn tight, enclosing the space in darkness and breath. Inside, warmth slowly gathered, though drafts still slipped beneath. Outside, the chamber remained cold, the air sharp and damp, the fire fading to embers. Pause once more. Imagine lying in such a bed, the weight of cloth pressing down, the air inside warmer but close, heavy with breath. Beyond the curtain, the room is silent, the fire dim, the walls as cold as ever. You pull the fur tighter, bury your face against the blanket, and listen to the muffled crackle of the last embers. For servants and guards, the ritual was simpler, though no less vital. They wrapped themselves in whatever they owned, woolen cloaks, scraps of hide, sometimes straw stuffed inside garments for insulation. In kitchens, some lay close to fires, letting warmth seep into their bodies until smoke and ash made them cough. In stables, others slept near animals, their breath rising in clouds, their bodies pressed close for warmth. To survive the night was to use whatever could be found. However humble, the difference between lord and servant lay not in the absence of cold, but in the layers available. A nobleman beneath fur and feather still felt frost on his face. A servant beneath rough wool still shivered in the dark. Cold was shared, though unevenly. It leveled the castle in its own way, reminding all that stone, no matter how grand, was indifferent to flesh. Pause again. Hear the shifting of blankets, the rustle of wool, the faint creak of bed cords as bodies settle into warmth. The chamber grows quiet, save for the sound of breathing. Yet the cold does not vanish. It waits at the edges, presses at the seams, lingers beyond the curtain, and you are left with a reflection that drifts like mist through shuttered windows. In the layered defenses of linen, wool, and fur, did people truly find rest? Or did they merely hold back the cold for a few fragile hours, waiting for dawn to return? The wind outside the castle walls sharpens As the night deepens, it rattles against shutters, moans faintly through arrow slits, and presses its chill into the very mortar of the keep. Inside, the fire burns low, its glow faint, its warmth reaching only a few steps before surrendering to the cold that presses against every surface. And yet, within these walls, people prepared their chambers carefully, creating islands of warmth where the long hours of winter night might be endured. Pause here. Imagine stepping into such a chamber. The air is cool, damp, touched by smoke. Your eyes adjust slowly to the flicker of candles. The light is golden. Its glow soft against heavy tapestries hung from the walls. The stone behind them is hidden, but you know it is there, massive and cold, radiating a chill that seeps into every object. The tapestries do more than tell stories of hunts and battles. They are insulation, thick, woven wool, trapping small pockets of warmth, muting echoes, softening the stone's voice on the floor. Rushes are scattered, layered with herbs that mask the scent of dampness. Each step rustles softly, a reminder that stone lies just beneath. Against the walls, benches and chests are pushed close, their wooden surfaces cold to the touch. In the center, a bed stands raised on a wooden frame, its curtains drawn, its blankets folded in heavy layers. The chamber is a fortress within a fortress, a space designed to trap warmth as carefully as the outer walls trap the household. Pause. Again, you hear the faint creak of bed cords as someone lies down, the rustle of blankets pulled close, the soft whisper of curtain rings sliding along their rod. The room falls into deeper silence. Only the fire breathes, crackling faintly in the corner. Architecture itself shaped the struggle with cold. Castle windows were narrow slits, good for defense, but poor for comfort. Even with shutters closed, drafts slipped through, carrying winter into the room. Some shutters were lined with cloth or leather, their seams stuffed with wool, but still, the chill lingered. Doorways, too thick as they were, never sealed perfectly. The castle was never fully closed to the breath of winter, and so chambers were arranged carefully. Beds were often placed away from direct drafts, tucked near the hearth, but not too close, lest sparks leap upon the covers. At night, the chamber became a smaller world. The fire was banked carefully, its embers covered in ash, so they might last until morning. The door was bolted, the shutters barred. Within the curtained bed, warmth gathered slowly. The breath of 2 or 3 sleepers thickened the air, clouding it faintly in the dim glow of a single candle. Outside the curtain, the room remained cold, shadows stretching long, silence heavy. But inside, there was survival. Pause once more. Get to the moment when the candle is pinched out. Darkness floods the chamber, broken only by the faint shimmer of embers. The smell of smoke and wool lingers. The sound of breathing softens. The bed curtain closes tightly, leaving you in a cocoon of warmth within a vast chamber that belongs. 2 cold servants prepared these chambers each evening. They laid out furs, smooth sheets, shook blankets to rid them of damp. They ensured fires were lit, shutters secured, water jugs covered against frost. Even with this care, cold remained. Water still froze overnight. Frost crept onto metal clasps and locks, and breath misted above pillows. Morning revealed stiff cloth, damp rushes, blankets heavy with the smell of smoke. Each night was a negotiation, each morning a reminder of how little had been one. Children often slept together, bundled tightly beneath furs, their small bodies pressed close. Servants sometimes shared chambers, lying on pallets of straw with cloaks drawn over them. Dogs, valued as much for their warmth as for their loyalty, were encouraged to sleep at the foot of beds or in corners. Their breath and bodies added to the fragile pocket of heat. Their presence, another layer of survival. For those without such measures, cold was merciless. Chronicles tell of travelers arriving at castles with frostbite, their fingers blackened, their breaths shallow. Then the keep, they found fire and fur, yet even then it was not comfort, but endurance. The stone gave nothing freely. It absorbed warmth, it offered silence. It reminded all who lived within that survival was constant, never guaranteed. Pause again. You hear the faint whimper of wind outside, the slow crack of timber contracting in frost, the soft stir of someone turning in sleep. The curtain shifts slightly, a draft slips in, and the sleeper pulls the blankets closer. The chamber is quiet, but the cold is never gone, and you're left with a reflection that drifts like breath fading into night, in chambers lined with tapestries and furs. Did people truly conquer the cold, or did they merely carve out fragile shelters, small enough to endure until dawn returned? Asterisk, the night has reached its deepest hours. Outside the castle, the land lies silent, covered in frost. The fields are still, the trees brittle with ice, the sky scattered with stars that shine sharp and cold. The wind drifts around the towers, slipping through battlements, pressing its chill against every seam of the stone. Inside, the keep is quiet too, though its silence is heavier, filled with the faint sounds of sleeping bodies, the crackle of dying embers, the occasional rattle of shutters against a gust. And within the private chambers, the battle against cold continues in silence, fought not with weapons, but with layers of warmth. Pause here. Imagine yourself within a bed, curtained tightly, the world outside muffled into darkness. You feel the weight of blankets pressing down, wool piled upon wool, furs heavy across shoulders, cloaks added for good measure. The air inside is warmer than the chamber, filled with breath and body heat, but it is thick, too close and heavy. You shift slightly, and the blankets do not move easily. They press like stone, confining, yet necessary. Sleep under such weight is not gentle, but it is survival. The medieval bed was more fortress than comfort. Straw or feather mattresses gave some softness, but it was the blankets and furs that defined the night. In inventories from castles, the number of coverings is striking 2, 3, sometimes 4 layers of wool, with pelts of fox, rabbit, or even bear added above. In colder regions, cloaks and spare garments were thrown across beds, every scrap of cloth pressed into service. Wealth meant more furs, finer wool, heavier quilts. Poverty meant fewer, thinner, rougher coverings. But whether rich or poor, the principle was the same. Warmth came not from space, but from weight. Pause again. You feel the heaviness of these layers pressing on your chest, your limbs pinned slightly, your breath rising in a small cloud above your face. The cold lingers at the edges, but the warmth within holds steady, fragile though it is. The bed curtain was the final layer. Drawn tight, it trapped heat, enclosed breath, muffled sound. Inside, the air was warmer, though often damp with condensation from many bodies. In families or among servants, 2 or 3 people might share such a space, their warmth mingling, their bodies pressed close. Dogs sometimes slipped beneath the curtains as well, curling at the feet, their breath steaming faintly in the dark night. It was crowded, but it was necessary. Cold was not courteous, pressed itself into every gap, every seam, every fold of cloth. Tired children often slept together, huddled beneath furs, their small limbs entwined. Couples shared warmth, not as romance, but as survival. Servants, if lucky, found places near hearths, though smoke stung their lungs. Guards, who could not sleep long, wrapped themselves in every layer they owned, nodding in corners before being called to watch again. Everyone bore the weight of cold, though the burdens were uneven. Pause once more. You hear the muffled sound of shifting bodies in the night, the rustle of wool, the faint sigh of someone stirring awake. A curtain lifts briefly, a draft slips in, and the sleeper tucks themselves tighter into the cocoon of warmth. The fire in the chamber glows faintly, but its light does not reach the bed. All that matters is the pocket of heat pressed against skin, fragile and fleeting. The psychological burden of cold was as real as the physical. To know that each night would bring hours of shivering, each dawn stiff joints and numb fingers, was to live with winter as a constant companion. Yet people endured. They trusted in their layers, their furs, their curtains, their companions. They knew that the weight pressing on them was not merely fabric, but survival itself. And when dawn came, the cold returned quickly. Curtains were drawn aside, and the chamber flooded with chill. Blankets were thrown back, their warmth vanishing in an instant. Breath misted in the air. Water jugs were found frozen, and limbs ached as they stretched. Fires were coaxed from embers, furs shaken, rushes scattered anew. The weight of warmth was lifted, but so too was its protection. Daylight did not mean warmth. It meant only that labor began again, with cold still present, patient, waiting. Pause again. You picture rising from the bed, your feet striking the stone floor, its chill shooting through your body. You pull the cloak tightly, but still the stone presses. The chamber is dim, the fire only beginning to stir. The night has passed, but the cold has not. It remains as eternal as the castle itself, and you are left with a reflection that drifts like frost across glass. Was warmth in medieval castles ever truly comfort? Or was it always weight, heavy, confining, necessary, pressing bodies into sleep, not with peace, but with endurance? The castle has grown quiet again. The dogs have curled in corners of the courtyard. The watchmen pace along battlements with their torches sputtering. Waned within the walls, chambers are sealed as best they can be against drafts. Yet silence here is never empty. It is filled with the faint crackle of dying embers, the soft rustle of straw beneath bodies, the low sighs of sleepers pressed together for warmth. For in medieval castles, sleep was rarely solitary tot. Pause here. Imagine yourself drawing back a heavy curtain and peering into a bedchamber. The fire in the hearth is nearly gone, only embers glowing faintly red. The air is cold, sharp against your nose, and your breath lingers in mist. But within the bed, a cluster of bodies lies close, their shapes hidden beneath piled furs. Their breaths rise together, a rhythm of survival, a tide of warmth against the stone's endless chill. Shared warmth was not a choice so much as a necessity. In an age when winters could freeze, rivers solid and frost lingered in hallways, the human body was a source of heat more reliable than any fire. Families shared beds, siblings slept side by side, servants curled against one another, and even nobles, despite their wealth, often drew companions near. Warmth multiplied with bodies, and sleep became communal, a negotiation of space and breath. Pause again. You feel the press of another body beside you, their shoulder against yours, their warmth seeping through layers of cloth. You hear their breathing, steady and slow, and though the space is cramped, the cold lessens. The closeness becomes its own kind of insulation, a fragile fortress against stone in great households. The lord and lady might sleep within grand beds, enclosed by curtains, but even there they were rarely alone. Attendants might sleep nearby. Children often shared chambers, and animals to found places within the warmth. Dogs curled at the feet of their masters, prized not only for loyalty, but for the steady heat of their bodies. Cats slipped beneath blankets, their purrs faint in the dark. The line between companion and necessity blurred, for in the struggle against cold, all warmth was welcome. Servants in lesser chambers slept in groups, on pallets of straw or shared mattresses stuffed with reeds. They huddled close, their cloaks pulled tight, their limbs entangled. Some accounts speak of servants lying side by side on rush-covered floors, their bodies forming chains of heat, guards on night duty, when relieved, often curled together in corners of towers, cloaks drawn over both, their torches sputtering faintly nearby. In such places, dignity gave way to survival. Pause once more. You picture a small group of children bundled in a corner bed, their bodies pressed close, their faces half hidden beneath wool. One stirs, sighing softly, then settles again. There, warmth mingles, their sleep shed. The air outside their blankets is cold, but within, a fragile comfort holds stock communal sleep-shaped habits of trust and intimacy, secrets whispered in the dark, stories told before drifting off, prayers murmured aloud, all carried into the shared silence of night. To lie beside someone was not only to share warmth, but to share vulnerability. In castles where drafts crept and fires dimmed, warmth was a collective achievement. No one endured winter nights alone without cost. Even in monasteries, where vows demanded silence and solitude, the struggle against cold altered practice. Monks slept in dormitories, their beds arranged in rows, their bodies wrapped in layers of wool. Their silence was broken only by the rustle of blankets, a soft creak of wood, the shared breath of many men enduring the same chill. Records speak of monastic rules allowing extra coverings during harsh winters, though always tempered by discipline. Even in piety, warmth was communal. Pause again. You stand at the edge of such a dormitory in your imagination. The air is cold, the floor covered with rushes, the only light a candle burning low. You hear the breath of many men sleeping in rhythm, their bodies hidden beneath heavy layers, their presence filling the silence more than words ever could. The cold lingers, but together they endure it. For children, shared warmth was safety, as well as comfort. A child who might shiver alone could sleep soundly, pressed between siblings. Mothers tucked their infants beneath furs close to their own bodies, their breath and warmth mingling through the night. The danger of cold was real. Infants and the elderly were most vulnerable, and so the sharing of warmth was a matter not of convenience, but of survival. The rhythm of night was shaped by this closeness. One stirred, and the others felt it. One turned, and the shift spread through the bed. Mingled, warmth shifted. The cocoon adjusted itself without words. Sleep was communal, not only in necessity, but in experience. And though privacy was rare, the endurance of warmth gave comfort stronger than solitude. Pause once more. You feel the weight of bodies beside you, the warmth they bring, the confinement of blankets that press you together. It is not spacious, not free, but it is steady. Outside the bed, the cold waits. Inside, survival continues through the night, and you are left with a reflection that drifts like breath into frozen air in the stone silence of medieval castles. Its rest found in the solitude of a single bed, or in the warmth of many bodies huddled together, enduring winter as one. Asterisk, the hour grows late, and though most of the castle has withdrawn into the stillness of sleep, not all may rest. The cold presses against the battlements, the towers, the gates, and it is here, on the edges of stone, that the night watchers keep their posts. Their bodies are wrapped in cloaks, their feet shift constantly against the frozen ground. Their torches sputter with every gust of wind. For those tasked with guard duty, there were no heavy curtains of wool, no layers of fur, no feather mattresses. Waiting, their nights were spent in company with cold itself. Pause here. Imagine standing on a tower, the wind cutting sharply across your face. The torch in your hand flickers weakly, its light bending away from the gusts. You see your breath rising in pale clouds. You feel your fingers stiffening inside leather gloves. You hear the groan of the wooden gate far below as frost settles into its hinges. The silence of the night is vast, broken only by the occasional call of another guard echoing across the walls. Guards learned quickly that stillness was their enemy. To stop moving was to let frost creep into bone. They paced back and forth, stamping their boots, tightening their cloaks against their chests. Some huddled close together in corners, shielded from the wind, their bodies sharing what little heat they could muster. In the coldest nights, they lit small braziers of coal, carrying them to towers where the red glow gave a little warmth and a steady source of light. But fuel was costly, and such relief was not always available. Pause again. You picture two guards, standing shoulder to shoulder beside a brazier, their faces ruddy with heat on one side, frozen on the other. They hold their hands close to the coals, then rub them together quickly before returning to their rounds. The brazier glows like a small heart in the vast body of the castle, fragile but faithful. When their shift ended, the guards sought rest, in whatever corner they could find. Some curled together in small guard rooms, their cloaks spread across straw pallets. Others slumped against the walls, torches extinguished, sleep stolen in fragments before duty called again. Theirs was never the deep sleep of those behind bed curtains, but the shallow, uneasy sleep of men who knew the cold was always waiting to rouse them inside the keep. Watchfulness continued too. Fires were tended even in the night. A servant might rise quietly from his pallet to stir embers, coaxing them back to flame before they died. In noble chambers, attendants sometimes slept lightly near doors, ready to rise and feed the hearth. Cold could kill a fire as quickly as it chilled the body, and so vigilance against it became part of the night's rhythm. Pause once more. You hear the faint scrape of iron against wood as a poker stirs embers. Sparks leap briefly, casting the chamber in sudden brightness before settling back into a glow. The sound is small, but it carries across the silence, a reminder that even in sleep, some eyes must remain open. This watchfulness shaped the rhythm of medieval nights. Sleep came in portions, divided by tasks, interrupted by shifts, broken by the need to tend warmth or to stand guard. The two-sleep pattern described in later accounts suited such a world. People often lay down after dusk, rose again in the deep hours, then returned to rest until dawn. In the intervals, prayers were said, fires were fed, guards were changed. Cold itself demanded this rhythm, pulling people from warmth, pushing them into wakefulness, insisting that night be endured in fragments rather than in peace. And yet, even in such hardship, there was companionship. Guards spoke softly to one another, their words muffled by the wind. Servants, tending fires, nodded to each other in the dark, their silence an acknowledgement of shared labor. In kitchens, where warmth lingered longer, men and women rose at odd hours to prepare for the day, their presence breaking the stillness with clatter and breath. The castle was never fully asleep. It breathed in shifts, in pockets of wakefulness, in scattered flames against the night. Pause again. Imagine walking the corridors at midnight. You pass a guard, half asleep on his feet, his torch dim. You hear the quiet sound of a poker in the great hall's hearth, the faint creak of shutters shifting in the wind. The castle feels alive, its silence stitched together by these small movements, its cold kept at bay by human persistence. The shared warmth of night then was not only physical, it was the warmth of presence, of knowing that someone else stirred embers, that someone else stood on the walls, that someone else whispered prayers while others slept. Cold was endured, not in isolation, but in fragments of companionships spread across chambers, towers, and courtyards. And you are left with the reflection that drifts like torch smoke against the wind in the long hours of winter night. Was survival found only in the warmth of furs, or also in the quiet knowledge that others kept watch, their breath and flame holding darkness away for all? Asterisk, the night inside a medieval castle was not silent in the way you might first imagine. The wind outside howled against battlements and moaned through arrow slits. Yes, but within the chambers, within the curtained beds, within the small corners where people huddled together, the air was filled with quieter sounds. The faint rustle of wool shifting, the creak of bed cords under weight, the low murmur of someone stirring, the soft exhalation of breath rising in steady rhythm. In the long hours of winter, warmth was shared as much through presence as through cloth. Pause. Here, imagine lying in such a bed, not alone, but surrounded. Okay. The curtain is drawn tight, the air within warm but heavy, carrying the scent of smoke and wool, of straw and fur. Around you, others breathe slowly, their shoulders pressing faintly against yours, their warmth mingling with your own. When one shifts, the bed itself creaks, and the movement ripples outward, a shared adjustment that resettles the cocoon. Sleep here is not solitude. It is survival together. The body itself became part of the architecture of warmth. Linen shirts absorbed sweat, wool tunics held heat, fur cloaks trapped it near the skin. But it was the closeness of bodies that kept frost from settling in bones. Families lay in heaps, siblings pressed so tightly, their arms tangled, their hair mingled, their breath warmed each other's faces. Servants lay side by side in corners, their cloaks thrown over them all together, forming a patchwork of insulation. Even animals joined the arrangement. Dogs curled at feet, their paws twitching in dreams, cats slipping beneath covers, their purrs thrumming faintly in the dark. Pause again. You feel the sudden weight of a dog shifting against your legs, the soft brush of its fur warming your feet. You hear the faint murmur of a child whispering before sleep, the hushed response of another, and then the slow quiet that follows. The cold is still present, pressing against the curtain, seeping through seams. But inside, within this shared breath, it feels further away. The breath of many bodies filled chambers with condensation. In the morning, when curtains were drawn aside, frost sometimes rimmed the fabric. The moisture of sleep turned to ice. Blankets smelled heavy, damp with sweat and smoke. And yet, the discomfort was small compared to the alternative. Better the weight of damp wool than the bite of unbroken cold. The discomfort was endured because survival depended upon it. This closeness shaped more than warmth. It shaped memory. Many medieval accounts describe the intimacy of shared nights' prayers whispered together, lullabies sung softly, stories told in the dark to distract from the chill. Bedtime was not only an end to the day, but a ritual of togetherness. Children learned histories from their elders in these hours. Servants whispered gossip. Guards murmured tales before drifting into shallow rest. The night became not only a struggle, but a gathering, a quiet communion beneath layers of fur and cloth. Pause once more. You hear the faint rhythm of voices fading, the stories dissolving into silence, replaced by steady breathing. The darkness feels less vast, less sharp. The sound of breath is enough to remind you that you are not alone, that warmth is shared, that cold, though present, does not conquer. Even nobles, despite wealth, slept in closeness. A lord and lady might share a great bed, but attendants often slept nearby, ready to serve if called. Children nestled close, their presence considered both proper and necessary. Solitude was rare. It's the idea of sleeping alone in a wide chamber, with only cold for company, was a thing few desired, no matter their rank. Cold made companions of all, yet privacy, too, was scarce. Sleep in company meant breath on your face, bodies pressing too near, limbs entangled. It meant waking to the sound of someone else shifting, someone else coughing, someone else murmuring in dreams. But these inconveniences mattered little compared to the alternative. Cold had no respect for dignity. It pressed equally upon those who longed for solitude and those content with company. Better to wake to the press of a sibling's elbow than to the bite of frost against bearskin and castles. Even the air itself seemed to demand this togetherness. High ceilings carried heat away quickly. Stone drank warmth and gave none in return. Drafts slipped beneath doors, slipped through shutters, pressed against tapestries. The only spaces where warmth lingered were those shaped by human presence. Bed, curds, cloaks, furs, bodies together. These became the hearts of the night. Pause. Again, you picture waking in the darkest hour, the fire gone, the chamber vast and cold. But inside the curtain, the warmth remains, fragile but real, pressed close by those around you. You breathe slowly, your breath joining theirs, your warmth mingling with theirs. The silence deepened by presence. When dawn came, the closeness unraveled. Cage curtains were drawn back, cold rushed in, blankets were thrown aside. Breath clouded in the chill air, limbs stiffened, children shivered. The chamber filled with the sound of stirring, of voices rough with sleep, of servants moving quickly to stir embers. The warmth of the night dissolved, leaving only memory in damp blankets, but it had carried them through, as it always did, as it always would, and you are left with a reflection that drifts like the fading. Warmth of breath in cold air was survival in the castles of winter, truly built by stone walls and roaring fires? Or was it held more quietly in the shared warmth of bodies pressed together, breathing in the dark? Asterisk, the castle sleeps, but the chapel does not. While halls are silent and chambers sealed against the cold, the small stone sanctuary holds its own rhythm. A candle flickers before the altar, its flame steady despite the drafts that slip through narrow windows. The smell of wax and incense hangs in the air, mingling with the dampness of stone. Outside, the night wind moans against the towers, but here the silence is thicker, the stillness heavier. Pause here. Picture yourself stepping softly into the chapel. The door creaks faintly, the sound swallowed quickly by the stone. You see shadows shifting across walls lined with painted saints, their faces lit by trembling light. You hear the faint echo of your own breath, loud against the quiet. The cold is sharp, but the flame before the altar burns like a fragile heart, pushing back the dark one inch at a time. For many who lived in castles, sleep was not only a struggle against cold, but a matter of faith. Nights were long, broken by prayer as much as by watchfulness. Monks within monastic keeps, knights in fortified strongholds, and even servants who carried quiet devotion all turned to the small glow of chapels in the deep hours. Candles were lit through vigils, their flames marking prayers whispered in the dark. The warmth here was not physical so much as spiritual, yet for many it was enough to endure the night. Pause again. You hear the faint crackle of a wick, the whisper of a prayer spoken under breath, the shuffle of feet on rushes as someone kneels. Cold remains pressing at your back, but the silence draws you inward, away from its bite. Vigils through the bot, vigils through the night were not uncommon, especially on feast days or in times of crisis. Men and women gathered, wrapped in cloaks, their breath visible in the air as they prayed. The candles they lit gave little heat, yet they transformed the chamber into a place of endurance. The stone remained cold, but the act of lighting flame after flame carried its own power, as though devotion itself warmed the body. Servants, after tending fires or carrying water, sometimes slipped into chapels for moments of quiet before returning to their straw pallets. Guards, released from duty, paused here too, whispering thanks for safe watches. Even lords and ladies, wrapped in fur, sought comfort in night prayers. Their wealth, unable to banish the cold, but sufficient to buy candles that burned steadily through long hours. Pause once more. Imagine the glow of many small flames filling the chapel. Their light flickers across wooden beams, glimmers on chalices of brass, softens the painted eyes of saints. The air grows warmer, not in truth, but in feeling. The silence hums with shared breath, with quiet hope, with patience. Asterisk, the fire of the hearth and the flame of the chapel were not separate in medieval life. Both gave endurance through nights that seemed endless. One burned wood, the other burned wax, but both pushed back the same cold, the same darkness. Sleep was always broken by the need to tend fires, to feed embers, to whisper prayers. Faith and flame were twin companions against the winter of stone, and you are left with a reflection that drifts like smoke above a dying candle. In the silence of medieval castles was warmth found in the flames themselves, or in the devotion of those who kept them burning through the coldest hours of night. Asterisk, the chapel's candles burn in silence, but elsewhere in the castle, other flames must be guarded. Fires in the great hall, in the kitchens, in the small chambers of lords and ladies, each must be kept alive through the night. Wood is heavy, costly, and not always plentiful. To let a fire die meant waking in a room filled with frost, water frozen solid in jugs, limbs stiffened against stone. And so, the tending of hearths was itself a duty of faith, entrusted to servants who knew that flame was life. Pause here. Imagine a servant rising from a pallet of straw in the deep of night. The air is sharp, her breath misting in the darkness. She pulls a cloak around her shoulders, stiff with smoke, and steps quietly through corridors. The rushes beneath her. Feet rustle faintly, their scent of herbs now mixed with the dampness of winter. She carries a small poker and a bundle of kindling. Her steps echo softly, the silence of the castle pressing in on every side. In the great hall, the fire has burned low. Only embers remain, glowing faintly in ash. She kneels, stirring them gently, coaxing sparks into life. The sound is soft, the scrape of iron against wood, the sudden hiss as a spark catches. She lays kindling carefully, breathes upon it, watches as flame trembles and then rises, small but steady. Round her, the hall is vast and cold. Its tapestries hang motionless, benches stand empty, the high ceiling disappears into shadow. But before the hearth, warmth slowly grows again. Pause again. You hear the sigh of flame spreading, the crackle of new wood catching, the faint rustle of sparks rising. You feel the first touch of heat against your face, fragile but real. Hall remains cold, but the fire is alive once more. This ritual was repeated across the castle. In kitchens, hearths were banked with ash, coals buried deep to keep their heat until dawn. In bedchambers, fires burned smaller, but attendants rose to feed them, adding logs carefully so as not to wake their lords. In guard rooms, braziers of coal glowed red, watched closely lest they sputter out. Fire was never left untended. Its presence was too precious, its loss too dangerous. The scarcity of wood made this vigilance more urgent. Forests near castles were managed carefully, their trees cut and carted in great effort. Wood was stored in yards, dried through summer for use in winter. Yet, in harsh years, shortages came. Records speak of households rationing logs, of fires reduced to embers, of families huddling closer to survive nights when the hearth could not burn strong. Even in great castles, wealth could not summon warmth from bare forests. Pause once more. You picture the woodpile in a courtyard, snow crusting its surface, logs split and stacked, waiting. Each piece is a fragment of survival, each destined to vanish into flame and smoke before winter ends. The sight is both comfort and warning. The tending of fires was not only physical labor, but spiritual duty. Prayers were sometimes whispered as flames were coaxed back to life. Blessings were spoken over embers, crosses traced in ash. Fire was both tool and symbol, its presence marking the thin line between survival and ruin. To guard it was to honor life itself, to keep darkness at bay, not only with warmth, but with devotion. And so, sleep in castles was always broken. Servants rose to feed flames, guards warmed hands at braziers, mothers stirred embers near children's beds. Night was not an unbroken descent into rest, but a series of intervals shaped by fire's needs. Even in dreams, people remained aware of its importance, waking suddenly to check coals, to listen for the crackle that meant safety. Pause again. You hear the faint snap of wood, the gentle rush of air as fire rises. It's a quiet exhale of relief from the servant as she settles the log in place. Around her, the hall remains vast and cold, but the hearth glows brighter, casting light upon the silence, and you are left with a reflection that drifts like smoke into rafters in the long nights of castles. Was it fire that kept people alive, or the unbroken vigilance of those who tended it, waking again and again so that others might continue to sleep? The fire in the great hall burns low again, its embers glowing like tired eyes, its smoke rising in thin threads toward the dark rafters. In the chapel, candles gutter one by one, their wax dripping steadily, their flames trembling as drafts slip through narrow slits of stone. The castle at this hour feels both alive and fading, its warmth retreating, its cold advancing, its silence stretching wider. And yet, in the faint glow that remains, something lingers that is not only survival, but meaning. Pause here. Imagine kneeling in the chapel at midnight. The cold bites at your knees through the rushes, your hands clasped tightly to keep them warm. Before you, a single candle remains burning on the altar. Its light is soft, golden, reaching only a little way, but it is enough to illuminate the carved face of a saint. You feel the weight of the stone around you, its silence pressing, its breath cold. Yet in that small flame, the darkness seems less absolute. For medieval people, light was never only practical, it was sacred. The flame itself was tied to devotion, its presence marking the boundary between despair and hope. To keep candles burning before saints through the night was to acknowledge not only the cold of stone, but the endurance of spirit. In vigils, candles were lit in rows, each one a prayer, each one a fragment of warmth pressed into the silence. Their glow could not heat the chamber, but it carried meaning stronger than warmth. Pause again. You see a row of candles trembling together, their flames dancing in unison, their light glimmering against gold leaf on painted icons. You hear the soft breath of those who kneel nearby, their prayers spoken low, their hands folded tightly. The cold is still present, yet it feels held back, if only by a little. The sacred glow carried into daily life. Bedchambers themselves were sometimes blessed with candles lit before crucifixes, their small flames meant to guard sleepers through the dark. Children whispered prayers before the light. Women traced crosses in the air before extinguishing them. Men woke in the deep hours and relit candles as a shield against shadows. The flame was fragile, but it was presence, a companion, a silent watcher. In monastic keeps, vigils stretched for hours, monks wrapped in heavy habits, their bodies stiff with cold, yet their eyes fixed on the glow of candles that never ceased. Their chanting rose in steady rhythm, carried on breath visible in the air. Firewood was scarce, but wax was guarded carefully for these moments. Its flame considered more than comfort, more than survival. It was faith embodied, warmth of another kind. Pause once more. Imagine standing at the doorway of such a vigil. The chamber is dark, the cold immediate, but before you stretches a line of monks, their hoods pulled low, their voices humming in unison. Candles flicker before them, their flames rising and falling gently. You feel both the chill of stone and the calm of devotion mingling together in the silence. Even outside the chapel, faith and flame remained intertwined. In the deep of winter, When cold claimed fields and famine stalked villages, people lit candles to mark hope for dawn, for spring, for survival. Each small glow carried symbolic weight far beyond its heat, spread, and so, in castles, sleep itself became a sacred act, a surrender to darkness made safer by flame, by prayer, by ritual. The fires, tended by servants, and the candles, guarded by monks, were not different in essence. Both were vigil. Both demanded attention, patience, endurance. Both gave comfort, not only in warmth, but in meaning. Sleep could not be deep or unbroken, yet within its fragments, people found reassurance in the presence of light, whether from embers glowing in hearths or candles trembling in chapels. Pause again. You hear the faint hiss of wax as it drips onto stone, the quiet shift of cloth as someone adjusts their cloak, the low murmur of a prayer dissolving into silence. The flame continues, steady despite drafts, small against stone, yet immense in what it carries, and you are left with a reflection that drifts like smoke across a vaulted ceiling. In the vast cold of medieval castles was survival in the night, sustained by the heat of fire, or by the sacred glow that reminded each sleeper, even in darkness, that they were not entirely alone. Asterisk, the season turns, and with it, the castle changes its breath. Autumn's smoke and harvest smells fade, and the air grows sharper, carrying the edge of winter. The stone walls, which were cool even in summer, now radiate a deeper chill, as though they are remembering centuries of frost pressed into their foundations. The first frost appears on shutters at dawn, white crystals catching faint light, silent but certain in their message. The long nights are beginning again. Pause here. Imagine walking into a chamber on such a morning. The shutters are closed, but frost clings to their edges, curling along the seams. The rushes on the floor are stiff, their herbs faded, their dampness rising into the air. You breathe in, and your lungs feel the sting of cold that has settled overnight. A jug of water near the bed is frozen at its surface, its skin of ice faintly glimmering in the half-light. The fire has burned to ash, its warmth gone. The room smells of smoke, wool, and stone. This was the rhythm of winter in castles. Each year it returned, and each year it was endured. Preparation was everything. By late autumn, wood had been gathered, furs laid out, bed curtains mended, rushes replaced. Herbs were sprinkled across floors, lavender, rosemary, thyme, not only to sweeten the air, but to mask the dampness that could never be banished. Children were given thicker cloaks, servants carried logs more frequently, and the sound of axes striking wood echoed across courtyards. The castle braced itself for the cold as one braces against a siege, knowing the enemy would last for months. Pause again. You hear the thud of an axe striking, the ring of wood splitting, the grunt of effort as logs are hauled and stacked. You see the breath of laborers in clouds, their hands raw and red, their tunics stiff with frost. The air is filled with the sharp smell of resin, of fresh wood, split open. The castle gathers its defenses, not of stone this time, but of fuel. The first frosts were reminders of what awaited. They brought not only discomfort, but memory of past winters survived, of nights endured with teeth chattering, of mornings when even fire gave little relief. Families recalled years when wood was scarce, when livestock perished in snow, when famine shadowed the hall. Cold was not only felt, but remembered, passed down in stories, etched into habits, shaping the way people slept each year when frost returned. Inside, the beds were prepared as carefully as stores of grain. Straw mattresses were restuffed, feathers shaken, furs laid thick, curtains were checked for gaps, blankets for tears. Stones heated in hearths were wrapped in cloth and slipped beneath covers, their warmth fleeting but precious. Sleep became a nightly negotiation, a layering of defenses as deliberate as armor. before battle. Linen against skin, wool above, fur beyond, curtains closed, bodies close together. Each layer remembered winters past, each adjustment made with knowledge of what the cold could take. Pause once more. Picture yourself tucking beneath these layers on the first frost of the season. You feel the sheets cool at first, then slowly warmed by your body. You pull the furs higher, close the curtain, and lie still, listening to the silence outside. The castle feels vast, its stone eternal, its cold pressing. But within your small pocket of warmth, you sense a fragile truce. The first frost, also, brought changes in rhythm. Days grew shorter, tasks shifted. Fires were lit earlier, meals taken sooner, prayers said before night pressed in. Sleep itself followed the cycle. First rest, then waking in the deep hours, then second sleep until dawn. The cold encouraged these breaks. People woke to tend fires, to check livestock, to pray, to breathe warmth back into their spaces. In this way, the night was not a single descent into darkness, but a passage marked by intervals, each one endured. With patience, the castle learned its habits from centuries of frost. Servants rose without complaint to carry wood. Guards stamped their feet more often, their torches sputtering in sharper winds. Children curled tighter in their beds. Mothers whispered longer prayers. Each breath of cold carried with it the memory of countless winters past, as though the stone itself reminded them, this is how it has always been. Pause again. You hear the faint crack of frost outside, the moan of wind against battlements, the creak of shutters strained by ice. Within, the silence thickens, broken only by the soft shifting of sleepers pulling their blankets closer. The first frost is quiet, but its presence is unmistakable, and you are left with a reflection that drifts like frost on glass in castles where stone remembered centuries of winter. Was each season truly new, or only the return of a memory, carried into sleep by those who knew it would come again? Asterisk. The days shrink quickly once the first frost has settled. Shadows lengthen across courtyards sooner, and the castle bell seems to toll dusk almost before labor has finished. By late afternoon, fires are already lit, shutters closed, cloaks drawn tight. And then the nights begin, long, heavy, pressing. They stretch not in silence alone, but in the weight of hours, each one colder than the last. Pause here. Imagine the keep at such an hour. The halls are dim, their tapestries hanging heavy, but still. The hearths are glowing, their fires tended carefully, yet the heat fades before it can fill the vast stone. You walk across the floor and feel the chill seep upward through your boots. The air smells of smoke, damp wool, and herbs scattered on the rushes. Above, the beams vanish into shadow. The sense is not of warmth, but of survival. The castle holding itself together against the season. The longest nights demanded habits that became almost ritual. Sleep was divided, first a few hours after dusk, then waking in the dark to tend fires, whisper prayers, or check livestock, then lying down again for second sleep until dawn. This rhythm matched the cold itself, for fires rarely lasted unbroken through the night. Servants rose to stir embers, guards rotated their watches, mothers checked children's coverings. The night was a series of tasks woven through with fragments of sleep. Pause again. You hear the soft scrape of a poker against coals, the sudden hiss of sparks rising, the creak of a bed frame as someone stirs. Then silence again, heavy but alive with faint sound. The castle breathes in shifts, never wholly still, never wholly awake. For nobles, the length of night was endured behind curtains, drawn tight, in beds heavy with furs. Fires burned in their chambers. Attendants rose quietly to feed them. Blankets were layered thick. Yet even here, the cold was never banished. Breath clouded in the air. Water froze in jugs. Frost crept along shutters. The longest nights were reminders that wealth did not defeat winter. It only softened its hand. For servants, the habits were harsher. Many slept on pallets near kitchens, their warmth stolen from hearts that burned for bread and broth. Some lay in guardrooms, curled, near braziers, their rest broken by calls to watch. Others found corners where drafts pressed hardest, their cloaks wrapped tight, their bodies huddled together. Their sleep was shallow, fragmented, taken in pieces rather than in peace. And yet they endured, as countless winters had taught them. 2. Pause once more. Picture a group of servants curled on straw, their cloaks overlapping, their breath rising together in pale clouds. One shifts, another sighs. The warmth adjusts inside their circle. The chamber is dark and sharp with cold. But within, the air is thicker, held by their presence. The longest nights carried not only hardship, but memory. Tales were told of winters when snow buried villages, when wolves prowled closer to walls, when famine followed frozen harvests. These memories lived within the habits of every evening. The extra blanket spread, cloak set near the bed, the prayer whispered before extinguishing the last candle. To sleep was never casual in winter. It was deliberate, careful, shaped by the weight of history. And so, castles themselves seemed to take on a personality during these months. Their walls groaned under frost, their beams creaked, their stones wept with damp. Keep became less fortress than cave, holding its inhabitants together in a silence that was both protective and oppressive. The cold outside was vast, but inside it was intimate, pressing close, breathing down every corridor. Pause again. You hear the faint drip of melted frost finding its way down stone, the whisper of wind against shutters, the sigh of sleepers, drawing blankets closer. The night feels endless, but it is endured one breath at a time, and you are left with a reflection that drifts like a cloud of breath to frozen air. In the length of winter nights, did people truly rest? Or did they only wait for dawn, passing the hours with fragments of sleep stitched together by fire, prayer, and patience? The castle lies in its coldest silence just before dawn. Fires have burned low, their embers faint beneath layers of ash. Curtains remain drawn tight around beds, their fabric stiff with frost where breath has condensed in the night. The rushes on the floors are brittle, herbs crushed flat, their scent faded. In every chamber, sleepers lie in heavy stillness, not the peace of comfort, but the weight of endurance. Pause here. Imagine drawing back the curtain of a bed in this hour. The air strikes your face sharply, colder than any time before. Here, breath clouds instantly, rising pale in the dimness. You look toward the hearth and see only the faintest shimmer of embers, their glow almost gone. The stone around you is darker, heavier, pressing closer, as though the night has left its breath. Upon it, in such hours, people stirred reluctantly. Servants rose first, pulling on cloaks stiff with damp, their feet striking the cold of stone floors. They moved quickly to stir fires, to coax coals back to life, to stack logs carefully so that warmth might spread again. Their hands trembled from chill, their breath hissed with effort, but they worked silently, their task as old as the castle itself. Pause again. You hear the scrape of iron against embers, the faint hiss of sparks, the quiet sigh as flames catch once more. The glow spreads across the chamber, pushing shadows back, though the cold still lingers thick. For nobles, dawn came with attendants, pulling curtains wide, letting in the faint light of morning through narrow shutters. The sudden rush of cold air was sharp, yet the new fire promised relief. Blankets were drawn back, furs shaken, cloaks wrapped around shoulders before feet touched the floor. Water, frozen solid in jugs, was cracked with knives for washing. Each act of rising was shaped by the cold, a negotiation before the day could begin. For servants and guards, the transition was harsher still. Their straw pallets were damp, their cloaks stiff, their limbs aching from the weight of cold. But they rose slowly, stamping their feet, rubbing their hands, moving quickly to whatever labor awaited. There was no comfort in dawn, only work that carried them into its pale light. The longest nights gave way not to rest, but to renewed endurance. Yet dawn brought memory too. It's a sight of frost glittering on shutters, of breath rising like mist, of snow drifting against walls. All these were reminders of winters past, of survival carried across generations. Families spoke of ancestors who endured harsher frosts, who lived through famine, who prayed through endless nights. Castles themselves seemed to hold such memory, their stones whispering of centuries of winters endured. Each one survived by the same fragile rituals of fire, fabric, and faith. Pause once more. Picture the courtyard as dawn spreads. Frost covers every surface, glimmering pale in the first light. The breath of animals rises in clouds from stables, their bodies huddled close. Servants cross the yard with bundles of wood, their steps crunching against frozen ground. The air is sharp, but above, the sky begins to soften with a faint glow of morning dot inside. Beds are stripped, blankets folded, fires stoked higher. Chambers fill slowly with noise again, voices rough from sleep, the clatter of pots, the shuffle of feet across rushes. The night has passed, though its memory lingers in stiff fingers, in damp furs, in the silence that still clings to walls. Each dawn is both relief and reminder. The cold is not gone, only waiting to return with the next nightfall. The rhythm repeats, day after day, season after season. Winter becomes less an event than a companion, relentless, patient, always near. Castles endure it, not with ease, but with habit, shaped by centuries of survival. Those who slept within their walls carried no illusions of comfort. They knew that sleep was not escape from cold, but an agreement with it, a fragile truce drawn each night, broken each dawn, a ring, renewed again with every ember coaxed to flame. Pause again. You hear the bell tolling faintly in the morning air, its sound echoing against frost-covered stone. The castle stirs, its silence giving way to life once more. The night has passed, the longest hours endured, the cold accepted for another day, and you are left with a reflection that drifts like breath in pale light. In the endless winters of medieval castles was survival through sleep a triumph over cold, or only a memory carried forward night after night until spring returned at last.